The flames tore through the desert night like a cruel burning sunrise, devouring the overturned patrol car in a roar that rattled the sand. Lila Rose McKenna, just 24, shielded her face from the heat as her German Shepherd Whiskey barked frantically, claws scraping the dirt near the shattered windshield. Through the smoke, she caught sight of him, a man battered and motionless, trapped behind the glass. With a desperate cry, Lila pried the door loose just as the vehicle erupted in a fiery blast, knocking her to the ground. Whiskey lunged forward, teeth gripping the man's sleeve, dragging him clear. His badge caught the firelight, darkened by blood. His lips trembled, life teetering on the edge. When his eyes finally flickered open, his voice came as a shredded whisper. "Don't call anyone. There's a traitor inside." The desert wind carried the words away, yet they cut deeper than the flames behind them. What followed would test courage, forge trust, and leave even the hardest heart shaken. The Nevada desert seemed to hold its breath that night. Heat still clung to the ground, though the sun had long sunk, and the sky stretched out as a dark indigo canvas dotted with stars sharp as glass shards. Dust swirled along the highway outside Reno, rattling brittle sagebrush and whispering over rocks like an old warning. It was one of those summer nights where silence felt thick, pregnant with anticipation. Lila Rose McKenna drove alone, on the near-empty stretch headlights, cutting through darkness like knives. At 24, she carried the quiet resilience of someone who had learned to fend for herself early. Her life on Nevada's outskirts was simple, a small cabin, part-time work at a diner, and evenings with her only constant companion, Whiskey. The 3-year-old shepherd coat, sable black, streaked with tan, sat upright in the passenger seat, amber eyes scanning the shadows as if on duty. Strong yet gentle. Whiskey had once been rescued from a rough shelter life. Lila had taken him in when he was just a year old. Since then, he had become more than a pet, her shadow, her protector, her only family on lonely nights like this. She brushed a chestnut strand from her face. The windows rolled halfway down to welcome the warm desert air. Life had not been easy since her parents passed, her father a mechanic who never left Nevada, and her mother a local school teacher, but Lila carried them with her in small, cherished ways. Her father's old pocket knife hung from her keychain. Her mother's cross swung from a chain at her neck. As she crested a rise, Whiskey stiffened ears, pricking forward. A low rumbling growl vibrated through his chest. Lila followed his gaze, easing off the gas. Up ahead, across the 2-lane road, something dark loomed. The beam of her headlights caught twisted metal. A patrol car lay overturned on its side, one wheel spinning lazily as if clinging to life. Smoke curled from beneath the hood, climbing into the starlit sky like a signal. The acrid smell of gasoline stung her nostrils. Her heart jumped. She pulled onto the shoulder tires, crunching over gravel, shifting the truck into park. "Stay." She ordered Whiskey, though she knew he wouldn't. She grabbed the flashlight from the glove box and ran toward the wreck. The cruiser's roof was crushed glass, splintered across the asphalt. In the dim flicker of flames under the hood, she saw him. A man slumped against the driver's side, half trapped between seat and dashboard. Unconscious blood streaked down his temple. His uniform identified him instantly as an officer. The reflective badge glinted in the firelight, and beneath the blood she could just make out the stitched name, Colt Remington. Colt was 35, dark brown hair matted against his forehead, features sharp with years of discipline. His shirt was torn at the shoulder, his chest rising in shallow, labored breaths. He looked like he'd been caught in something far larger than a simple crash. Lila whispered, voice cracking, "Oh God." Whiskey barked furiously at her side paws, raking at the door claws, screeching across metal. He sensed the danger. She hadn't yet fully realized the hiss of gasoline sparks crawling along the wreck. "Easy, boy, easy," Lila muttered, though her own panic spiked as flames began to catch. The car was going to blow. She yanked the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Her flashlight caught a faint twitch of Colt's hand. His lips moved without sound. Whiskey barked again, circling, then nudged Lila with his shoulder, as if to say, "Now." Adrenaline surged. She braced both hands on the dented metal and pulled with all her strength. The door groaned, but refused to yield. Sweat poured despite the desert night. At last, with a screech of torn steel, it gave just enough. "Come on!" she gasped, slipping an arm under Colt's shoulders. He was heavier than he looked, his body limp, uncooperative. Blood smeared Lila's hands as she strained to drag him free. Whiskey clamped onto Colt Remington's sleeve teeth, careful not to rip the fabric, pulling in perfect sync with her. Inch by inch, they managed to get him halfway out before the night erupted around them. The patrol car detonated behind them, sending a fireball that lit the desert in merciless orange. The blast threw Lila onto her side, dragging Colt with her. Heat seared her skin dust, filled her lungs, and her ears rang with the thunderous roar of the explosion. For a heartbeat, the world was nothing but fire and sound. Then, through the ringing in her ears, she heard Whiskey's sharp, insistent bark. Alive. Lila coughed, pushing herself upright. Colt lay sprawled beside her, unconscious, but breathing. His chest rose and fell in quick, shallow bursts, lips pale beneath the grime. Lila's hands trembled as she pressed her fingers to his pulse. Weak, but alive. The burning car behind them sent sparks into the desert wind, painting the night in cruel light. Lila stared at the flames, then at the man at her feet. She didn't know him beyond the badge and the blood, but one thing was clear: leaving him here meant death. "Help me, Whiskey," she whispered, hoarse. Together, girl and dog heaved the fallen man from the shadow of fire. Lila slid her arms under his shoulders. Whiskey tugged at Colt's sleeve, and inch by inch they hauled him toward her truck. The night swallowed their struggle, the desert wind carrying away the roar of flames, leaving only Whiskey's determined growls and Lila's ragged breaths. By the time she got Colt into the back seat, her arms burned with exhaustion, yet she did not stop. She slammed the door shut, Whiskey leaping in beside the wounded man lying protectively at his side. Lila climbed into the driver's seat, hands shaking as she started the engine. The headlights swept over the burning wreck one last time before she turned the truck around, racing toward her cabin. The desert stretched endlessly and silent around them. Behind her, Colt Remington lay unconscious, carrying secrets Lila couldn't yet grasp, while Whiskey kept his gaze fixed on the window, ears pricked, as if he knew the night's tests weren't over. The desert road gave way to gravel as Lila's old truck bounced along toward safety. The headlights carved a narrow path through the black, the engine's hum blending with Whiskey's steady panting. In the back, Colt groaned faintly, his bloodied uniform catching the dashboard glow. Lila gripped the wheel tighter. She wasn't used to strangers in her life, much less half-dead men, but leaving him wasn't an option. Her cabin stood at the edge of the desert, a single-story wooden shelter her father, Zane Holloway, had built long before she was born. Weathered and leaning tin roof battered by storms, but to Lila, it was home. Tonight, though, it felt fragile against the vast, dark, the danger stalking them from the road. She pulled the truck to a stop, jumped out, and yanked open the back door. Whiskey leapt down first standing guard as Lila braced herself to drag Colt inside. It wasn't easy. He was tall, broad-shouldered, a man shaped by years of responsibility. His uniform was torn, stained with both blood and desert dust. With effort, Lila hooked his arm over her shoulders, Whiskey tugging gently at his sleeve, and together they hauled him inside. The cabin smelled of pine and old books. A small wood stove sat cold in the corner, a single oil lamp casting pale light. Lila laid Colt on the faded couch and hurried to fetch her first aid kit. An old tackle box her father had once used for fishing now held bandages, gauze, and antiseptic sharp enough to sting even unopened. She worked carefully, cutting away the worst of the torn fabric. Blood oozed from a gash at his temple and a jagged wound along his arm. She cleaned what she could, wincing, as she pressed gauze against his skin. Whiskey sat, close ears twitching at every sound outside. Eyes locked on the man as though weighing friend or foe. Colt stirred, groaning. His eyes fluttered open, dark, focused, wary. He jerked, slightly disoriented, trying to push himself up. Lila pressed a hand to his shoulder. "Easy," she said softly. "You're safe." "Right," he rasped. His gaze swept the unfamiliar walls, the flicker of the oil lamp, the dog beside him. Breathing still quickened. Then he looked at Lila's sweat-streaked hair, tired eyes, clothes spattered with his blood, and seemed to recognize her calm. "You pulled me out," he said, voice rough, strained. "You'd be ash by now if I hadn't," she replied. Colt let out a short, painful laugh that turned into a cough. He raised a trembling hand toward his chest pocket. Lila thought he was searching for a badge, but his fingers brushed a lump under the torn fabric. She hesitated, then helped him slip it free. A small flash drive metal casing, scratched but intact, gleamed in the lamplight. "That's what they want," he whispered. "This little piece of metal." Lila frowned. "What's on it?" He closed his eyes briefly, weighing how much to reveal. When he opened them again, there was no hesitation, only urgency. Evidence, a drug ring operating across Nevada, not just street dealers, but major players' names that could tear the state open if exposed. Colt's jaw clenched, anger and betrayal etched deep. "Someone in my own unit sold me out," he said through gritted teeth. "They tried to finish me before I could hand it over." Lila leaned back, stunned. Her cabin had never felt so small, so exposed. Corruption wasn't a new concept. Stories had floated around Nevada for years. But having it sprawled here on her couch, bleeding into her blankets, made it painfully real. "You can't go to a hospital?" she asked cautiously. Colt shook his head. "Not until I know who I can trust. If I show up in uniform, word spreads fast. I'd be dead before leaving the bed." Whiskey shifted closer, ears flicking, nose twitching at Colt's scent, tense and wary. Slowly, as if making his own decision, Whiskey lowered to the floor by Colt's boots, resting his head gently against the couch. Colt's lips curved into a faint, grateful smile. "Guess your dog believes me," he said. Lila exhaled. "He doesn't trust easy. Consider yourself lucky." The cabin settled into a fragile silence, broken only by the hiss of wind against the walls. Lila's eyes flicked to the flash drive in Colt's hand. "So what now? You hide here?" "Hope they forget about you." "They won't forget," Colt said, eyes hardening. "Not until I'm buried. I just need time to figure out who I can reach outside the chain of command. Until then, I'm relying on you." The weight of his words pressed down on her. Lila wasn't used to being needed, not by anyone. Since her parents passed, she'd built her life around survival, not responsibility. And now a stranger, bleeding hunted, was placing his life in her hands. She rubbed her palms across her jeans, suddenly aware of the bloodstains. "You should get some rest," she said finally. "We'll figure something out in the morning," Colt murmured, sinking back into the couch. Exhaustion pulled at him, steadying his breathing. Whiskey curled closer, one paw draped protectively across Colt's boots, a silent promise that no harm would come while he slept. Lila watched them, heart racing. The desert outside stretched vast and merciless, but the real danger wasn't out there. It was coming, carried on the shoulders of men who didn't want Colt Remington to see another sunrise. For tonight, though, the cabin held. The oil lamp burned low, and Lila, despite her fear, felt a strange stirring she hadn't in years, the weight of trust. The desert had a way of swallowing sound, leaving only the low whistle of wind over open land. By the time Colt drifted into a shallow, uneasy sleep, Lila sat by the window, staring at the horizon. The lamp flickered, casting long, exaggerated shadows. Outside, the sky was black and endless, studded with cold stars. She had patched him as best she could, but Colt still looked fragile, despite his strong frame. His face pale beneath smeared blood chest, rising in shallow breaths. Whiskey remained at the foot of the couch, ears half-pricked, vigilant. Lila leaned her forehead against the cool wood of the window frame and exhaled slowly. She had rescued him, yet she knew she'd brought danger straight into her home. When Colt stirred, his eyes focused on her with deliberate clarity. "You can't tell anyone where I am," he murmured, his voice raw, steadier than before. "Not your neighbors. Not anyone in town." "I don't really talk to anyone," Lila said quietly. "That's good," Colt muttered, struggling to sit up. He braced one hand against his bandaged side. "Until I know who I can trust in my unit, I need to stay off the radar. If they find me, that drive won't mean a thing. They'll bury me before sunrise." Lila didn't answer immediately. She felt the weight of the risk pressing against the thin cabin walls, and she saw the desperation in his eyes, a man running out of options. Whiskey growled, low tail flicking against the floorboards. Lila's gaze snapped to him. The shepherd had lifted his head, nose pointed toward the door, muscles taut, every line screaming alert. "What is it, boy?" she whispered. Colt instinctively reached for his sidearm, but the holster was empty, lost in the crash. His expression tightened. "Someone's out there," Lila realized, pulse spiking. She moved toward the door, barefoot steps, light against the old planks. She snuffed out the lamp, plunging the cabin into a deeper shade of night, the only light now a faint silver glow from the moon slipping through cracks in the boards. The knock never came. Instead, silence was broken by the crunch of gravel, the soft scrape of boots dragging across the porch. Two shadows shifted in the moonlight, barely visible. Lila's breath caught. She glanced at Colt Remington. He was forcing himself upright, pain etched across his face, but focus razor sharp. "Stay calm," he whispered. "Fear makes noise. Noise draws fire." Lila nodded, her palms slick with sweat. Whiskey moved before either of them could react. With a sudden snarl, he lunged at the door, barking with a ferocity that rattled the walls. His claws dug deep grooves into the wood as he threw his full weight forward. The sound shattered the night's silence, echoing across the desert. Outside, startled curses followed by hurried shouts rang out. Footsteps retreated rapidly, gravel scattering under quick boots. The shadows vanished into the desert darkness. For a moment, the cabin held only Whiskey's furious barking. Lila knelt, gripping his thick fur until he calmed. She pressed her forehead to his neck. "Good boy," she whispered, voice trembling. Colt leaned back, breath ragged. They weren't kids messing around. Trained men don't scatter at a dog unless caught off guard. They'd regroup. The thought sent a chill down Lila's spine, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "What do we do?" Colt motioned toward the old chest near the stove. "Anything useful in there?" Lila crossed the room and opened it. Inside were relics of her father Zane Holloway's life, an old hunting rifle, dusty boxes of shells, a battered revolver wrapped in oiled cloth. She'd never fired them beyond target practice with her dad, but she knew how to load and hold them. That would have to do. Colt said, "Check the windows. Reinforce the doors. Don't make this place a fortress. You want it unappealing. Predators pick easy prey." Lila nodded, closing the chest. She carried the revolver back and set it on the small table beside the couch. Her fingers shook, but Colt's calm, measured tone steadied her. He spoke like a man who had been in countless firefights, someone who had stared down death too many times to let fear rule him. As the night deepened, they worked quietly. Lila inspected every latch and window, while Colt, though weak, guided her with slow instructions, teaching her to notice small vulnerabilities, gaps in shutters, creaking boards, lines of sight that could expose them. In those few hours, she learned more about defense than in all her years of solitude. When the cabin finally settled into silence again, Lila sat opposite him, revolver within reach. Whiskey sprawled on the floor, one ear cocked toward the door. "Why are you helping me?" Colt asked after a long stretch of quiet. Lila looked down at her hands. "Because my father taught me not to turn away from someone bleeding on the road. And because Whiskey thinks you're worth saving." Colt's mouth twitched into almost a smile. "Then I guess I owe both of you my life twice over." They lapsed into silence again, less tense this time. Outside, the desert wind carried the faint cry of coyotes. Inside, the cabin felt like an island in a storm, fragile yet defiant. Despite lingering fear, Lila found herself breathing more steadily. She wasn't just sheltering a wounded man. She was standing beside him, learning how to fight the shadows pressing against her door. The cabin's quiet was heavy with unspoken things. The oil lamp burned low, casting elongated shadows against the rough wooden walls. Lila sat at the small kitchen table, fingers drumming against the grain as she tried to push away the memory of footsteps circling the porch. Colt shifted on the couch, wincing as he moved. His uniform was in tatters, streaked with blood and soot. With deliberate care, he peeled it back, inspecting what remained of his shirt pocket. His expression sharpened as his fingers brushed a hidden seam. From the flap, he pulled out the small flash drive, again scratched but intact, gleaming under the lamp. "This is it," he muttered, voice low but firm. "The reason I'm still breathing. The reason they want me dead." Lila leaned forward, brows furrowed. "That tiny piece of metal?" Colt nodded, jaw tight. It held surveillance recordings, financial records, names, faces. "One of them is running the operation," he continued. "If this gets to the right people, the cartel loses its hold. If not, we let them continue." The silence hung heavier than words. For the first time since she found him in the desert, Lila glimpsed the depth of his burden. Colt Remington wasn't just another man on the force. He had walked straight into the jaws of corruption and somehow crawled back out alive. She swallowed hard. "I know someone," Lila whispered softly. "Reverend Paul. He's been at the church in town since I was a kid. He's decent," she continued. "I could take it to him just to keep it safe." The mention of another name made Colt Remington's shoulders stiffen. He shook his head. "I can't risk it. I don't know who talks to who. You said it yourself. People in town notice things. If word spreads I'm still alive, that drive won't matter. It'll be over." Lila's mouth opened, then closed again. She wanted to argue push him, but the lines on Colt's face, the hard-earned caution of a man who'd survived betrayal, stopped her. Whiskey stirred by the door, nose twitching, ears pricked, moving with deliberate purpose toward the threshold. With a low growl, he began pawing at the seam where the wood met the floor. Lila rose quickly, alarm stabbing through her chest. "What is it, boy?" she whispered. Whiskey clawed again, nails scraping until something small slid loose from under the doorframe. A crumpled scrap of dirt-stained paper scribbles, barely legible in the dim light. Lila bent to pick it up, unfolding it carefully. Colt pushed himself upright despite the pain, eyes tracking her every move. Her gaze narrowed as she read the scrawled writing, Unit 42, Black Ford, 7G15. A license plate and car model, she realized. Colt's eyes hardened. That's no coincidence. One of the men outside last night must have dropped it. He took the paper from her, smoothing it on the table with bloody fingers. Unit 42. That's an internal designation. Someone in law enforcement is running vehicles under that number. They weren't just watching us. They were trying to take me out. The weight of his words pressed against the cabin walls. Lila shivered. She had grown up trusting the sheriff's department, believing the law would keep the town safe. Now a slip of paper revealed the enemy wasn't just desert criminals. It was men in the same uniform as Colt Remington. Whiskey sparked once, sharp and certain as if in agreement. He stood tall in the middle of the room, amber eyes flashing in the lamplight. For the first time, Lila realized he wasn't just a dog, he had become vigilant, a second line of defense. Colt rubbed his forehead, exhausted, but focused. That dog might be why we're still here. He caught the scent before I did. Lila crouched to scratch Whiskey's ears, voice softer now. He's my family, always has been. And now Colt said I guess he's yours too. The shepherd pressed his head into her hand, then trotted back to the window, settling into his post, as if understanding the gravity of the moment. Hours crawled by. Lila and Colt sat across from each other at the table, the paper with the license number between them. Colt explained what he suspected, a channel inside the department moving drugs under official cover, using marked units and falsified reports. Lila listened, mind-spinning with fear and disbelief. Every creak of the cabin made Whiskey's ears twitch. Each time Lila steadied herself, remembering Colt's words from the night before. Fear makes noise, and noise draws fire. By dawn, a thin line of light pushed through the cracks in the shutters. The desert air cooled briefly before the sun promised another scorching day. Colt leaned back, breathing, uneven eyes still locked on the flash drive. "This place is no longer just a cabin," he said quietly. "It's our safe house. And until we move your dog as our eyes and ears." Lila exhaled, clutching the revolver in her lap. "Then we'll listen to him. Every bark, every growl, if anyone comes close, we'll know." Outside the desert stretched wide and empty. Inside, three souls had begun weaving a fragile alliance bound by secrets, a scrap of paper, and the watchful eyes of a dog who refused to rest. The Nevada desert never truly slept, but that night it felt like the whole world held its breath. The sky was moonless, a dome of black velvet pricked with faint stars. A hot wind blew in from the east, carrying dust and sage. Inside the oil lamp flickered weakly. Lila sat awake, revolver resting on her lap, while Colt lay on the couch, wounds wrapped, but far from healed. Whiskey paced near the door, restless ears twitching at every shift of the wind. Around midnight, the unmistakable crunch of boots on gravel reached them. Whiskey froze, hackles rising. Then came faint voices, low, hushed, coordinated. Lila's breath caught. She glanced at Colt, already pushing himself upright, teeth gritted against pain. "They're here," he whispered. Before Lila could answer, glass shattered at the back of the cabin. A bottle rolled across the floor, liquid spilling sharp and oily. A rag stuffed into its neck glowed faintly with flame. Molotov Colt Remington hissed. The rag flared fire, licking along the cabin boards. Lila kicked the bottle toward the hearth, smothering it with an old quilt before the flames could spread. Whiskey let out a snarl that rattled the walls. Through the thin wood shadows moved 3 figures, circling, closing in. Lila caught a glimpse through the window. All men clad in dark work clothes, faces partly hidden by bandanas. One carried a shotgun, another a crowbar, the third a lighter flicking open and shooting sparks. They looked experienced men who had done this before. The one with the shotgun barked orders in a deep, gravelly voice, tall late 30s, his stance wide, radiating intimidation. The second man, wiry and sharp-eyed, couldn't stand still, nerves visible in every twitch. The third, broader, shaved head, handled the lighter with unnerving calm. "They're gonna burn us out," Colt said, voice clipped. He grabbed the hunting rifle Lila had laid beside the couch, hands shaking but steadying as he chambered around. "We can't hold here." Before Lila could answer, the first man kicked at the front door. Whiskey exploded forward, teeth bared, slamming into the wood. The impact startled the intruders just long enough for Colt to fire a warning shot through the window. The crack of the rifle echoed across the desert. "Move!" Colt barked. The second man lunged, shoving his crowbar through the window. Whiskey seized the moment. With a furious snarl, he leapt through the shattered frame, jaws clamping onto the man's arm. The guttural cry that followed was filled with shock and pain. The crowbar clattered to the ground. The other 2 turned, shouting. Lila snapped on her flashlight. The sudden beam blinded the shotgun wielder. She hurled a fist-sized rock, striking him across the cheek. He staggered back, cursing. Now Colt shouted, voice raw. Lila didn't hesitate. She rushed to his side, slipping an arm under his good shoulder. He was heavy, but adrenaline made her stronger than she thought. Together they stumbled out the back. Whiskey bounded after them, teeth still stained with the blood of the man he'd downed. Behind them, flames licked at the cabin walls. The third man had thrown another bottle, igniting near the porch. Within moments, the old wooden structure was a torch in the night. Lila's heart twisted. That cabin had been her sanctuary, the last piece of her father Zane Holloway she had left. There was no time for mourning. For bull. "The desert doesn't wait," Colt urged, breath ragged. "Keep moving. Don't stop." They plunged into the night, the desert stretching wide and merciless. Darkness disoriented her, the terrain unfamiliar even to Lila, who had lived here her whole life. But Whiskey surged ahead, nose to the ground, tail straight like a compass needle. "Trust him," she whispered, clutching Colt tighter. The German shepherd moved with certainty, weaving through mesquite and sage, leading them toward the jagged outline of a ridge. He found a narrow gap between boulders, a passage almost invisible in the dark. Lila followed without question, dragging Colt through the cleft. Behind them, shouts echoed. The attackers realized their prey had slipped away. A gunshot cracked the bullet, hissing past a rock with a sharp ping. Lila ducked instinctively, pulling Colt down. Whiskey barked once, sharp and commanding, then darted ahead. His silhouette vanished into the shadows, only to reappear moments later, circling back to guide them. His instincts cut through the fear, anchoring them on a path only he seemed to know. The desert grew colder as hours crawled by. Adrenaline dulled into exhaustion, but Lila forced her legs to move. Colt leaned heavier with each step, strength fading. At one point he stumbled, nearly dragging them both down, but Whiskey pressed against his side, nudging him forward, steadying him with sheer determination. Finally, they reached the far side of the ridge. The cabin now only a distant glow, flames devouring the last of its timbers. Smoke billowed into the sky like a funeral pyre. Lila stopped, chest-heaving, tears burning her eyes. "It's gone," she whispered. Colt's hand tightened weakly on her arm. "Better the cabin than us." Whiskey sat nearby, tongue lolling, chest. heaving eyes scanning the darkness. He wasn't resting. Not really. He was listening, guarding, making sure the shadows didn't bring more danger. Lila knelt beside him, pressing her forehead to his neck. "You saved us," she murmured. "We'd be ash if not for you." Colt lowered himself onto a rock face, drawn but resolute. "That dog isn't just a pet. He's the reason we're still alive. He's leading us now." The desert wind blew hard, carrying the sharp tang of smoke and gasoline. Behind them, the only home Lila Rose McKenna had ever known had collapsed in a final thunderous crash. Ahead, the unknown stretched wide and dark, but with Whiskey at their side, the path forward didn't feel impossible. By dawn, the cabin's flames had dwindled to smoke on the horizon. Lila led Colt Remington through the desert, Whiskey guiding them every step away from the ruins, pulling painfully at her heart. The sun rose relentless, its light turning sand to gold and heat pressing down like a hammer. Colt leaned heavily on her shoulder, face drawn and pale jaw locked with grim determination. They needed shelter. The desert didn't forgive. After hours tramping through dust and dry scrub, Lila spotted the faint outline of an old farmstead, its silhouette jagged against the horizon. Weather-beaten fences sagged around a patch of dry earth, and the barn leaned dangerously to one side. A faded house with peeling paint stood behind it, abandoned for years. "That'll have to do," Lila said, voice hoarse. The three approached carefully. Whiskey sniffed the air, ears twitching, body tense, but calm. The dog seemed to sense safety here, or at least the absence of immediate danger. Lila helped Colt through the warped front door. The air was musty, carrying the scent of mildew and dry wood, but the walls stood. For now, it was enough. They settled Colt onto an old sofa draped with dust. He closed his eyes briefly, breathing ragged but steady. Lila moved through the rooms, brushing cobwebs aside. She remembered how her father, Zane Holloway, had spoken of shelters like this back when he was alive. Her father had been a soldier before returning to Nevada to raise a family, carrying scars both on his body and in his silence. After he passed, Lila had found his old journal tucked in a box of belongings. In it, he had written, "In the darkest nights, the smallest kindness from a stranger can be a lantern. Trust it even when the world tells you not to." She thought of those words now, as she set a pot on the rusted stove, filling it with what little water they had left. Colt's eyes opened, catching hers, as if he'd heard her father's words without them spoken. "You didn't have to drag me out of that fire," he said quietly. "I know," Lila replied, "but my father used to say that sometimes strangers are the only family you'll have left." Colt studied her, then glanced at Whiskey, who had curled close to his boots like a sentinel. For the first time since she had pulled him from the wreck, Colt's expression softened. "I guess I've found my family for now." The words carried more weight than Lila expected. She looked down quickly, busying herself with tending the stove. As day bled into evening, Whiskey grew restless. He prowled the edges of the farmhouse, nose to the ground, tail stiff. Lila followed him into the barn shafts of light, piercing the broken roof dust, floating like ghosts. Whiskey halted near a pile of old hay, barking once, sharp and commanding. From the shadows came a startled gasp. A small figure scrambled back, eyes wide, clothes dirty and torn. A boy, maybe 12, shock of unkempt blonde hair, hollow cheeks. His jeans ripped at the knees, shirt too big, cinched at the waist with a length of rope. "Don't hurt me," the boy cried, hands raised defensively. Lila's heart squeezed. She crouched, keeping her voice soft. Hey, it's all right. We're not here to hurt you. What's your name, Tommy? He stammered, eyes darting between her and Whiskey. Boone Slater. Lila realized silently, though, the boy introduced himself as Tommy Hayes. He couldn't stop glancing at the dog, who stood tall ears forward, not aggressive. Whiskey's gaze was sharp, yet curious. After a moment, he lowered himself onto his haunches, signaling no harm. Lila stepped closer. How long have you been here? Tommy shrugged. Small shoulders tense. Couple weeks. My mom left, said she'd come back. She didn't. Dad left before that. His voice cracked with bitterness. Nobody wants me, so I stayed. Safer than the streets, The admission hit Lila harder than she expected. She exchanged a glance with Colt, who had followed her into the barn, leaning against the doorframe. Pale from exertion, his eyes stayed steady on the boy. Kid's got guts to survive out here alone. Colt said quietly, Don't need anybody. I can take care of myself. Whiskey moved closer, sniffing the boy's hand. Tommy froze, then slowly reached out, brushing fingers against the shepherd's thick fur. For the first time, a flicker of trust crossed his face. Lila smiled gently. Maybe you don't need anyone. But sometimes, she added softly, having someone doesn't make the nights any shorter, it just makes them easier. The boy looked at her, uncertain, but he didn't pull away when Whiskey licked his fingers once, sealing a quiet pact. They brought Boone Slater back into the farmhouse. Lila Rose McKenna handed him half her meager portion of food without hesitation, and Colt Remington, though visibly weary, spoke to him with firm respect. They didn't push for details. The boy's wounds were fresh. Forcing words from him would only drive him away. That night, as the desert wind howled through gaps in the walls, 3 humans and 1 dog huddled inside the abandoned farm. Lila lay awake, listening to the steady breathing of Colt and Boone. She thought again of her father's words. In the darkest nights, the smallest kindness from a stranger can be a lantern. Perhaps the lantern they'd been given wasn't just Colt, not just herself, but this boy too, pulled from the shadows found, because Whiskey refused to ignore what others might have missed. For the first time since the cabin burned, Lila let herself believe survival wasn't just running. Maybe it was about finding light in the most unlikely places. The farmhouse gave them shelter, but it wasn't a place to linger. The next night, Boone joined them fully, and Colt insisted they needed to move. His wounds healed slowly, but his mind was sharper than ever. He sat at the rickety kitchen table, the USB drive resting before him like a sacred relic. Lila leaned against the wall, arms crossed, listening. Boone sat on the floor with whiskey fingers threading through the shepherd's thick coat. We can't keep hiding, Colt, said voice gravelly. Sooner or later they'll track us here, he continued. The only way forward is to draw them out. Lila frowned. Draw them out. You mean, bait them? Exactly, Colt replied. They think I'm dead or too weak to fight. If I let a whisper slip that I'm alive, the traitor inside the department won't resist. He'll come to finish what he started. Boone's eyes widened. But that's dangerous. What if they kill us all? Colt glanced at the boy, softening his tone. That's why we planted it right. We choose the ground. Make them walk into our trap. Whiskey lifted his head, ears flicking as if he understood. Lila reached down, scratching the dog's neck. Where do we do it? She asked. Colt tapped the table with one finger. Old mining site south of here. Deserted for years. Collapsed shafts, rusted scaffolding. Perfect for an ambush and for turning it back on them. The plan was set. Lila would drive into town with Boone, quietly spreading rumors of a man fitting Colt's description near the mine. Small-town whispers traveled faster than any radio. Colt, pale but resolute, promised he could muster enough strength to face whoever arrived. By the next evening, the trap was ready. The four waited in the broken shadows of the mining site. The air smelled of iron and dust. Wind whistled through rusted beams like a mournful song. Lila crouched beside Whiskey, revolver close. Boone, despite fear, gripped a heavy flashlight like a weapon, arms tense. Colt leaned against a beam rifle across his knees. The first sound came just after sundown, the crunch of tires on gravel. A black SUV rolled into the clearing, headlights cutting across the ruins. Lila's stomach clenched. The driver stepped out first. Tall, solidly built uniform pressed even in the desert dust. Graying hair at the temples, jawline sharp beneath the brim of his department-issued cap. Recognition flickered in Colt's eyes. Jed Polk. Colt muttered, voice low, bitter. Once his colleague, he had been steady, dependable, the kind who never raised his voice. Tonight, his calm demeanor was edged with menace, hand on his pistol gaze, sweeping the mine with cold calculation. "I knew you couldn't stay down, Cole," he called, tone almost conversational. "You should have taken the fall." "Easier on everyone," Colt shot back, pushing himself upright, leaning on the beam but steadying his rifle. "You sold us out to the cartel," he said. Jed's lips curved into a sneer. "I did what I had to. The department's rotten. The system pays better than a lifetime of service ever would. You should have joined me." Whiskey growled low, and rumbling eyes locking on Jed with an intensity that made Lila's skin prickle. Jed raised his pistol not at Colt but at Lila, crouched by the rocks. "She's just baggage," he said coldly. The shot never came. Whiskey launched forward like lightning teeth, bared fur bristling. He struck Jed squarely in the arm, forcing the gun to discharge harmlessly into the dirt. The two crashed to the ground, Jed cursing as the dog's jaws clamped onto his sleeve. Lila leapt from cover, revolver raised. Boone, heart-hammering, shone his flashlight into Jed's face, blinding him for a moment. Colt staggered forward, leveling his rifle. "Drop it, Jed," he barked. The fight was desperate. Jed Polk was strong boots digging into the gravel as he wrestled against Whiskey's weight. He slammed his elbow into the dog's side, trying to shake him loose, but Whiskey held fast, snarling teeth tearing through fabric. Lila Rose McKenna fired a warning shot into the air. The crack echoed through the mine like thunder. Jed froze, breath-ragged eyes flicking between the barrel of Colt Remington's rifle and the unwavering glare of Lila's revolver. Blood trickled from his arm where Whiskey's teeth had pierced the skin. "You're finished," Colt said, voice steady now. "This drive will expose every deal you've made, every name you've protected. The cartel won't save you, and neither will your badge." For the first time, Jed's calm facade cracked. His jaw tightened, eyes blazing with fury, but he didn't move. He knew the fight was over. Colt nodded at Whiskey. "Off." The shepherd obeyed, reluctantly releasing Jed, but staying crouched, ready to strike at the first hint of betrayal. Lila kept her revolver-trained chest rising and falling quickly. Boone Slater, still clutching the flashlight, whispered, "Did we win?" Colt exhaled, lowering his rifle just slightly. "We held the line. That's enough for tonight." He stepped forward, taking the flash drive from his pocket and holding it up. "This stays safe. No one burns it, no one buries it, not anymore." The night wind swept through the mine, carrying away the last echoes of the struggle. Jed Polk, once a man Colt had trusted, now stood disarmed and defeated. The USB was still in their hands, and for the first time, Lila felt the balance shift. They weren't just running anymore. They had fought back and won. The wind shifted with dawn, carrying the scent of dust, and something cleaner, sharper, the kind of air that follows a storm. In the silence of the abandoned mine, Jed sat on the ground, wrists bound with rope cut from Colt's old pack. His calm facade had shattered face gray with exhaustion and anger. Colt leaned heavily against a rusted beam rifle still within reach, though his wound slowed him. Lila stood beside Whiskey, who never took his eyes off Jed. Boone hovered a few steps back, flashlight gripped tightly, shoulders rigid from the weight of everything he'd witnessed. "We need to end this," he murmured. Colt said quietly, reaching into his jacket pocket and holding up the USB drive. "This has to get into the right hands." By noon, dust trails appeared on the horizon. A convoy of sleek black SUVs with tinted windows and flashing federal insignias approached. The FBI had arrived. The lead vehicle stopped and a woman stepped out. Early 40s, tall, dark hair in a neat bun suit, still crisp despite desert dust. Her badge flashed in the sunlight. Cora Bell Hannigan. She had the no-nonsense air of someone who had walked through plenty of war zones before. Agent Hannigan Colt greeted hoarsely voice, carrying both relief and suspicion. I wasn't sure who to trust. She studied him a moment, then nodded. "We've been tracking whispers of this operation for months. When word reached us that Lieutenant Polk might be involved, we knew it was deeper than we feared. You did the right thing, Officer Remington." Her team moved quickly, taking Jed into custody. He didn't resist now. Shoulders slumped, eyes hollow. The cartel's promises had crumbled under the weight of the law. Hannigan examined the USB as Colt handed it over. "This will seal it. With this evidence, we cut their network out by the roots. You've not only cleared your name, you've saved lives." Colt exhaled, weeks of tension lifting from his shoulders. "That's all I ever wanted." Whiskey let out a short bark, echoing the sentiment. Hannigan crouched briefly, offering her hand for the shepherd to sniff. "And I hear we have this one to thank as well," she said with a faint smile. "Looks like you've got a better partner than most men ever find." Lila felt a swell of pride at Whiskey's side. He had been more than a dog shield scout anchor when everything else fell apart. As Jed was led away, Boone Slater shuffled closer to Colt's face, wary, uncertain of what the future held now that the danger was passing. Colt placed a hand gently on the boy's shoulder. "You're not going back to the streets," he said firmly. "There's a program of family placement ranch outside Carson City. They take in kids who've been left behind, give them a place to belong. I'll make sure you get there." Boone blinked hard, fighting back tears. For the first time, hope flickered in his eyes. "You mean, I'd have a real home?" Colt nodded. "A real home. And if you ever want to see us, you'll know where to find us." The boy suddenly hugged Whiskey, burying his face in the shepherd's thick fur. Whiskey tolerated it with quiet dignity, tail thumping once against the ground. In the days that followed, events moved swiftly. Federal agents swept through the desert raiding safe houses and arresting cartel operatives. News spread across Nevada. A major drug network dismantled corruption, exposed, and one officer's honor restored. Colt Remington's name, once whispered with suspicion, was now spoken with respect. When it was all over, Lila Rose McKenna found herself standing outside a new cabin, freshly built on the same land where her father's home had burned. The walls smelled of cut pine. The windows gleamed clear, and the porch felt sturdy beneath her feet. She had built it with her own hands. Colt helped as much as his recovering body allowed. That evening, as the sun sank behind the desert hills, Lila lit the lantern by the door. Its glow spilled across the sand, warm and steady. Inside, Colt sat at the table, his arm bandaged spirit lighter. He caught her gaze and offered a small smile. "Funny thing," he said. "I thought I was finished, You and Whiskey proved me wrong. Lila lowered herself into the chair opposite him. You weren't finished. You just needed someone to remind you why it mattered. Whiskey lay stretched at their feet, sighing contentedly finally, at ease after weeks of tension. Outside the desert night unfolded vast and quiet, but no longer lonely. For Lila, the light from the lantern was more than a beacon for travelers. It was a promise that even after fire and betrayal, hope could be rebuilt. That family could be found in the most unlikely places, a wounded officer, a stray boy, and a dog, whose loyalty knew no bounds. The cabin glowed against the darkness, a new beginning written into its walls. Sometimes miracles come, not through grand gestures, but through ordinary people and loyal companions who show up when we need them most. Colt had thought his life finished. Lila had feared her home lost, and little Boone Slater had felt abandoned by the world. Yet in the darkest night, fate brought them together. Through courage, loyalty, and trust, ashes were turned into hope, and strangers became family. In our own lives, we may feel lost or betrayed, but the right people can still appear on our path. Sometimes the miracle is simply having someone stand beside us when we feel alone. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs encouragement today. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe for more stories of hope, and may life bless you and your loved ones. If you believe in miracles, type Amen in the comments.